Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm writing to What is Consciousness According to the Non-Dual Teachings of Advaita Vedanta. Now, I'm kind of wondering if they're gonna differentiate a little bit between the Atman and the Brahman, but I don't think so, because obviously it's non-dual. What is consciousness? Awareness. Actually, when they say awareness, consciousness, bliss, I mean, consciousness and awareness, I can completely see that. But bliss, though, that's a different story. But awareness and consciousness is being aware. I think that's probably what a Westerner would say, or maybe even most people would say. Is consciousness is awareness. If they can, tie those two together. I'm sure most people don't know what consciousness is, in a sense that they can't quite describe it, because I'd probably say just someone that's alive would probably the best answer most people would give. Probably someone that's alive. But anyways, let's go and give this video a shot.
Recently, I've received a number of questions about the nature of consciousness. Aman from Uttar Pradesh asks, what is the difference between pure consciousness, Chaitanya, and sentiency, Chaitana? Ganesh from here in New Jersey asks, what is the relationship between thoughts and consciousness? Om Prakash asks, how do we know if consciousness is really unchanging or not? Meghna asks about witness consciousness, Sakshi. And Paul, who lives in Poland, asks about reflected consciousness. Those are great questions. They're all focused on an extremely important teaching of Advaita Vedanta that describes the nature of Atma, your true self, as Sat Chit Ananda, eternal, limitless consciousness. Many scriptures describe Atma as the inner divinity that dwells within us all, or as the presence of Krishna, Rama, or some other form of God residing in your heart. But instead of using the language of theology, Advaita Vedanta uses precise philosophical terms to describe Atma as Sat Chit Ananda. Chit means pure consciousness, the consciousness that makes you aware of everything that's happening right now. For example, you're aware of the image of me on a screen and the sound of my voice. You're also aware of your thoughts, emotions, and any memories that might arise in your mind. Fundamentally speaking, you are a conscious being who is aware of whatever you happen to experience. For this reason, consciousness is indeed your essential nature, your true self. In the expression Sat Chit Ananda, Sat means existence, your existence as a conscious being. But your existence is anything but ordinary. The rishis of ancient India discovered that Atma is actually unborn, uncreated, eternal, and unchanging. That means your true self, Atma, is not subject to aging, illness, or death. That's why it's called the divinity that dwells within you. The rishis also described Atma as being Ananda. Here, the word Ananda doesn't really mean bliss as it's often translated, because it refers to Atma, the experiencer of bliss, the conscious being who is aware of blissful experiences. So, in this context, Ananda is better translated as perfect fullness, wholeness, or completeness. Traditional scholars often add the word ananta to the expression Satchidananda. Ananta means limitless, infinitely vast, that which is all-pervasive. So, Atma, the true self, is your essential nature as eternal, limitless, pure consciousness. But to simply understand the meaning of these words is not the goal here. Conceptual knowledge that Atma happens to be Satchidananda is merely information, and accumulating more information will never result in enlightenment, no matter how profound that information might be. On the other hand, the teachings of Advaita Vedanta can lead you through a life-changing process of self-inquiry. With that guidance, you can retrace the footsteps of the ancient rishis, in a manner of speaking, and personally discover what they discovered. That is, you can directly recognize or realize your true inner nature as Sat Chit Ananda. Now we can answer the questions.
It's really weird to say that, information can get you there. To a certain degree, absolutely. Obviously, you have to obtain enough information, and what I mean by this is that if you're never told any of this, would you know your true self? I mean, if you delve within yourself a lot, then you can discover it on your own, but still, delving within yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, your mind, is still gathering information, knowledge. So, of course, I think he means like you cannot obtain this by pure knowledge alone. You have to do, which I would 100% agree. So, obviously, you need information, meaning going to the books, reading them, seeing how they've done it, seeing the techniques that they've done, and then practicing it. Because learning about the techniques will never get you there, but you do need the knowledge to attempt to get there. So yes, no amount of information can get you there, but you do need information to get you there. It's weird to say.
Aman asks, what is the difference between pure consciousness, Chaitanya, and sentience, Chaitana? Chaitanya, as you might know, is just another word for Chit, consciousness. In Advaita Vedanta, Chit and Chaitanya are synonyms, just like their English equivalents, consciousness and awareness. All these words mean the same thing, but Chaitana means something very different when it's used to denote sentience. Sentience is your ability to perceive or experience the world around you. Sentience is a faculty of your body and mind that enables you to see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. Medical science doesn't generally differentiate sentience and consciousness. Both words are used to refer to a patient's ability to respond to external stimuli. Stimuli like familiar faces, or questions asked by a doctor, or physical contact. A patient who is completely unresponsive to all such stimuli is said to be unconscious. This medical finding can lead to lots of confusion because the medical and Vedantic definitions of consciousness are completely different. Doctors define consciousness in terms of a patient's behavior, whereas Vedanta defines consciousness in terms of a person's inner experience. When a patient is completely unresponsive, doctors really don't know what the patient actually happens to experience in that condition. Even if they measure the patient's brain activity, the powerful medical instruments used don't reveal anything about the patient's own inner experience. That personal experience is said to be private. That is, it's completely inaccessible to anyone else. According to Advaita Vedanta, it's impossible to observe or measure consciousness, like you can measure blood pressure, pulse rate, or brain activity. Consciousness is not a physical phenomenon that can be detected or quantified. For this reason, even when a patient is diagnosed as being brain dead, that diagnosis says nothing about consciousness, as understood in Advaita Vedanta.
So, real quick, I saw this on YouTube. They claim to be doctors, and they claim that unconscious people are able to respond. And it's through brain activity. So um, what they'll say is that to the unconscious person, say, hey, remember a happy memory, and remember it whenever you want to answer yes, and remember another memory, a different memory, and maybe a sad one or a scary one, or probably not those things. Probably just a different memory that could be happy as well. And remember that for no. And what they did is they answered this unconscious person, basically yes or no questions. And the way they know what the answer is by the memories, because your memories have a unique signature. I guess I would assume so, that it has a unique signature, what particular parts of your brain lights up. So, according to what I remember seeing there, again, it's been a little bit, but I'm skeptical of it. I could have been fake for all I know. That's why I say don't ever believe anything I say. Judge for yourself. But I could see the brain activity, but unconscious though. And mind you, in terms of Advaita Vedanta, you are always aware. Even if your body is unconscious, consciousness is still there. And this could potentially kind of prove that a little bit, that consciousness is still there. Like when you're having a deep dream, and it's not a deep dream, but when you're in this blankness, this darkness, between dreams and being awake, or yeah, being awake and dreaming, maybe in that state you can kind of remember things to activate certain things in your brain. Again, it's something I've seen only once. It might have just cropped up. I don't know if it's real. I can see the plausibility of it. It seems probable, but still unsure. Again, this is under the assumption that you know the consciousness can activate the brain in some way, form or function, and which goes to show also, if this is possible, that the brain does not quite have absolute control, because if you're able to respond, you can tell that person, hey, you're unconscious, wake up. And they'd be like, oh, I'm awake now. It goes to show there's something that's still locking the brain or locking the body from being conscious in terms of the medical terminology, basically awake and moving arms and everything. Whereas in this term, that the brain, either the brain or the consciousness, is able to respond, even though it can't activate the body, move or open the eyes or breathe or talk. It's still able to communicate through brain activity.
So then, what happens to consciousness at the time of death? From a Vedantic standpoint, the answer is nothing. Nothing at all. Since consciousness is an eternal, unchanging, fundamental reality, it remains utterly unaffected by death. You might wonder, for patients who are brain dead or in a deep coma, what do they experience? The answer again is nothing. To experience anything at all, you need a working mind. When the mind stops working due to brain death or coma, then for that patient, all experience comes to an end. But consciousness persists.
Because it's conscious of the nothingness. And this is something interesting that I remember talking about before. So essentially, it almost seems like consciousness is dependent on inputs. So like our five senses are inputs. So if we have another sense, like I don't know, a radar dish sticking out of our heads that can detect radar waves, that would be our sixth sense. Not like the sixth sense that we think of, like was it oh, sensing danger or whatever. But um, but I guess the question would be then is, what would be the point of consciousness without experience? It's what is it even? What's the purpose of it? I guess I don't know. Like, sure, consciousness still exists, but what would be the point if it cannot experience anything? It's the same as death. A consciousness that exists but cannot experience anything. What's the difference between that and pure death? Just say literal no consciousness. It'd be no difference, right? While one may be conscious, one may be dead, both experience nothing. Again, I'm just again thinking because comparatively they seem the same. What would be the point? Anyways, let's continue.
Just like you can be conscious of an experience, you can also be conscious of the absence of an experience. For example, if you stand in a perfectly dark closet with your eyes wide open, what do you see? Nothing. You can see, but there's nothing to be seen. In the same way, in the absence of a working mind, you remain conscious, but there's nothing to be conscious of.
Makes sense.
Properly understood, consciousness is not some kind of power or faculty that you happen to possess. A faculty is something you can lose. If you lose your ability to see, to hear, or to walk, you still exist as a conscious being.
What about whenever people say you lose consciousness? Just joking. That just typically means you go unconscious.
But in the absence of consciousness itself, you have no existence at all. So, consciousness is the essence of who you are. You don't have consciousness. You are consciousness. Next question. Ganesh asks, what is the relationship between thoughts and consciousness? For this question, there's both a simple answer and a more nuanced answer. Let's start simple. Thoughts are mental objects known as vrittis, and those vrittis are illumined or revealed by consciousness, by you, the conscious being. Just like the sun reveals the presence of objects by illumining them, so too the so-called light of consciousness reveals or illumines objects in your mind. This metaphor also shows something else that's extremely important. The sun doesn't get affected by whatever it happens to illumine. If it shines on a sacred temple or on a pile of stinking trash, the sun remains unchanged. In the same way, consciousness isn't affected by whatever mental objects it happens to reveal. When consciousness illumines happiness or sadness in your mind, it remains unchanged. Happiness and sadness are vrittis, constantly changing mental objects. But the consciousness that reveals them is an unchanging, eternal, fundamental reality. No doubt, consciousness seems to get affected by happiness, sadness, and other feelings. But as we've discussed in other videos, consciousness remains perfectly untainted in the presence of sadness. Just like this crystal remains perfectly untainted even in the presence of these orange robes. If you'd like to understand this better, you can watch the videos linked below. This sun metaphor is widely used in the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, but like all metaphors, it's not perfect. At best, metaphors are merely pointers or approximations. The problem with this metaphor is that it creates a division or duality between thoughts and the consciousness that reveals them. Advaita Vedanta rejects this duality and any kind of division between subject and object, or between revealer and revealed. To resolve this apparent duality, Advaita Vedanta uses the sun metaphor and then discards it, substituting another metaphor in its place. This is a unique and powerful method of teaching. It's often compared to using stepping stones to cross a stream. You have to leave the previous stone behind when you step onto the next one.
I do wonder what the other metaphor is. Is it the snake in the rope, or is it the dreamer, the dream?
In this way, we have to leave the sun metaphor behind so that we can move on to a more refined explanation. The metaphor we'll use is based on a pot. From the standpoint of Advaita Vedanta, this pot is nothing but clay. If it weighs 3 ounces, all that weight is due to clay. The pot adds nothing. Pot is said to be nama-rupa, mere name and form. When this particular name and form get associated with clay, we call it pot. And in your mind, when names and forms get associated with consciousness, we call them vrittis, mental objects. Let me explain. In your mind right now is an image or thought in the form of this pot. We'll call it a pot thought or a pot vritti. The pot in my hand is made of clay, so we can ask, what is the pot vritti in your mind made of? It's made of consciousness. Like this pot is a form of clay, the pot thought in your mind is a form of consciousness. And when that pot thought is present in consciousness, you experience the pot. The same is true for the image of my body and the sound of my voice. Both are present in your mind right now as vrittis. Those vrittis are different than a pot vritti, but they're made of the same consciousness. The reason for using this alternate metaphor is that it dismisses any kind of division or duality. This object is nothing but clay, clay in the form of a pot. In the same way, a pot vritti is nothing but consciousness. consciousness associated with the name and form pot. Advanced texts on Advaita Vedanta say that consciousness gets shaped or conditioned by nama-rupa. They use the term conditioned consciousness, or avachinna chaitanya. It's significant that Advaita Vedanta has developed a rich and highly nuanced vocabulary of words for consciousness, somewhat like the Eskimos, who have hundreds of words for different kinds of snow. Note that each kind of snow is nothing but water, H2O, and each kind of consciousness, conditioned consciousness, witness consciousness, reflected consciousness, and so on, all these are the very same consciousness, but from different perspectives. Now, on to the next question.
So, and I guess here's the thing, this reason why I still don't know. The one thing that makes it easy is that we all have individual consciousness. The reason why that's easily proved is because I am only ever aware of my own consciousness. You are only ever aware of your own consciousness. And even though it's the same consciousness, that doesn't mean it's the one consciousness. As in, like, you could say, like, every the pen. How do I phrase this? All the pens like this are the same pen. It means they're all manufactured the exact same click, the exact same ink, the exact same form, function, everything. That doesn't mean there's only one pen though, but there's many of these pens all the same, meaning that they click, they have the same they have the same ink, etc. And that's the I guess that's kind of the argument that, yeah, we all have consciousness, but is it one consciousness? The same one consciousness, not necessarily the same consciousness. Again, that's the only part where I'm like, I don't know. That's the one thing I will say. One thing I know is I do have consciousness, and this is my consciousness. Now, whether it's actually true that this is my consciousness is to be, known. But I'm only ever aware of mine, so that's what I know to be true. Until something comes up to where I am aware of the collective consciousness, and I guess that would be that I'm aware of your consciousness and everyone else's consciousness. Then I would know that is one true consciousness, because I am conscious of my thoughts. I'm conscious of my thoughts. I'm conscious of my thoughts. I don't have no one else to point at. I'm consciousness of my thoughts, because the one consciousness is pervasive through all minds. Therefore, and well, everything really. but in terms of, let's just keep it to the humans here. That means that I would be aware of your thoughts because I'm conscious of your thoughts. To say I'm conscious of your thoughts would be the consciousness is conscious of your thoughts, which would be our consciousness, if that makes sense. Whew.
Om Prakash asks, how do we know if consciousness is really unchanging or not? That's a good question, because consciousness certainly seems to change. For example, when you first wake up in the morning, your consciousness might seem dull. And after a shower and a cup of coffee, your consciousness seems to shine more brightly. But in fact, the dullness and brightness you experience are both known to you because your true self, Atma, is the unchanging consciousness that reveals them both, and all the other changing conditions of your mind. Many experiences can mislead you by producing an illusion of change or movement. For instance, when you watch the sun go down in the evening, the sun actually remains stationary in the sky while the earth slowly turns on its axis. In a traditional Vedantic example, you imagine yourself sitting in a boat, drifting very slowly down a tranquil stream. When you look towards the shore, the trees seem to be slowly moving upstream somehow. This illusion occurs when you fail to perceive that the boat is moving. This example describes how sadness can slowly creep into your mind and create the illusion that consciousness is gradually becoming sad. But like the evening sun and the trees on the shoreline remain completely stationary in spite of their apparent movement, in the same way, unchanging consciousness remains completely unaffected when sadness arises in your mind. Next question. Meghna asks about witness consciousness, sakshi. When a vritti, like a thought, emotion, or perception, arises in your mind and you become aware of it, consciousness is said to be the observer or witness of the vritti, the sakshi. By definition, a witness is an uninvolved observer. If you merely observe a crime being committed, then you are said to be a witness. But if you yourself are involved in the crime, then you're certainly not a passive witness. In this way, consciousness is a passive or detached observer of all the vrittis that arise in your mind. Those vrittis are observed without any action or effort whatsoever. Now, it's really important to understand that sakshi, as the conscious observer or awareful witness of your vrittis, is not a particular state of consciousness. Really speaking, consciousness itself can have no states at all because it's an unchanging fundamental reality. Yet, it's a common mistake to think that consciousness has various states, like higher or lower consciousness, or waking dream and sleep consciousness. But in each of these cases, it's actually your mind that shifts from one state to another, not unchanging consciousness. We discussed this thoroughly in an earlier video, linked below. Now, the last question, where Paul asks about reflected consciousness, known as pratibimba chaitanya, or as chid-abhasa. Both of these complicated expressions mean consciousness reflected by the mind. And reflected consciousness is simply a technical term used to denote experience, ordinary day-to-day experience. The term reflected consciousness is based on a metaphor in which consciousness is said to be reflected by your mind like sunlight reflected by a bucket of water. Here, the bucket represents your body. The water inside it represents your mind, and sunlight represents consciousness. When the sun is reflected in the water, its image is shaped or conditioned by ripples on the surface of the water. Those ripples represent the constantly changing vrittis in your mind. Vrittis are like mental ripples, so to speak, that shape or condition the consciousness reflected by your mind. According to Advaita Vedanta, experiences occur when consciousness is reflected by your mind and conditioned by those vrittis. Vrittis are responsible for everything you experience. Even though consciousness itself is unchanging, it gets conditioned or shaped into various forms by your vrittis, into forms like happiness and sadness, forms like the image of my body or of a pot, and into other forms like thoughts and memories. Experience is simply a form of consciousness, like a pot is a form of clay. This bucket metaphor is also used to illustrate another important teaching of the ancient rishis. They said that even though there are many conscious beings, there is only one consciousness, one Atma, one eternal, unchanging, fundamental reality. That limitless, all-pervasive consciousness is simultaneously reflected by countless minds, just like one sun simultaneously reflected by many buckets of water. That means the very same consciousness is reflected right now in your mind and in my mind. So there's no such thing as your consciousness or my consciousness. There is only one uncreated, all-pervasive consciousness, one Atma, the self of all, the inner divinity of every being. If you'd like to submit a question for a future video like this one, please send it to me at the address shown at the end. Be sure to indicate video question in the subject line. Also, please join us online for our weekly satsang, live streamed every Sunday at 11 o'clock.
Okay, if you want to submit a question, which I guess I got to resubmit mine too, from you. So he goes over about your consciousness, my consciousness, which is a question I had. But I guess it could make sense for me if it happened this way, where we are all, there is only one consciousness, but we're all grasping like little bubbles of it. Little bubbles of consciousness, as though it was separate. It's separate only in the sense that of what we are aware of. Hold on, let me say it and see if it makes sense. It's only separate in the sense of what we're aware of, but it's not separate because it's all one and the same. So while I cannot be aware, I cannot be conscious of your thoughts because my conscious bubble, it's only limited to what I know, what my experiences are. Whereas, yes, I guess that would be it. So it would apply to you too, where you'd only ever be conscious of the things that you do or that you experience, and you can never be conscious of my experiences because while the consciousness may be one, but we can only ever experience what our consciousness experience through the body. Again, it's kind of hard to try to say it quite right without really thinking about it because I have to, obviously, in terms of Advaita Vedanta, consciousness is, and that is it. So even the thing that we experience is consciousness itself. So it's consciousness being aware, being conscious of consciousness, consciousness being aware of consciousness, and trying to word it in such a way that would make sense. Because obviously, even the mind and the body that the consciousness is in is actually consciousness itself as well. So, um, it's really hard to form it in such a way, again, to be understandable, or form a question where it makes sense without adding a bit of restrictions. But again, like I said, like my thoughts is that, it's hard to, because there's no proof, I guess. Even though they're similar, like I said, even though consciousness between everyone is similar, that doesn't mean it's the one same consciousness, though. Just because they're all similar doesn't mean it's all the same. It's all the one. Or let me say, it can be all the same, but it doesn't mean it's the one and the same. um, but again, regardless of whether you believe there is individual consciousness or one consciousness, the whole point is still through getting enlightened. So I wouldn't, what is it, argue with someone who's saying, "Oh no, there's everyone has an individual consciousness. There's no such thing as one consciousness." That's their belief, and as long as the belief is less suffering and to enlightenment, then, well, if that path works for you, that path works for you. It's kind of like bhakti yoga, where it's duality. And if they get enlightenment through bhakti yoga, then you're not going to sit there and argue with them. No, 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 no. There's only one consciousness. These gods don't exist. You just wouldn't do that. So it's the same thing for people who maybe believe in multiple consciousness or single consciousness, whatever that may be. Which for me, whatever the truth is, the truth is. But I just only know what I know, and until I learn otherwise, that's the only thing I know. So that's my reaction to what is consciousness. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, the sound down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.